This week, the Supreme Court of the United States issued several major decisions. New Yorkers are finally facing the quote unquote warmth of collectivism in New York City, and Americans across the country are getting together and celebrating 250 years of the greatest and freest nation on the world. My name is Ben Corriveau, and welcome to my show. Okay, so to start off with, just some quick news. This is going to be a shorter episode just because I'm traveling today. I'll be going down to DC for the fireworks. By the time this video is published, I will be down there. So I hope to see you there if you're down there. But let's get into it. So first we had Trump releasing a Make America Healthy Again executive order. And this was kind of surprising because there wasn't really any indication that it was going to happen, especially after the Monsanto decision. I believe that was last week that we talked about that. So that happened, and a lot of Make America Healthy Again people were very upset over that. Well, he made things a little bit better with this executive order where he had several major steps in the direction of making America healthy again. First is that it prioritizes registration actions related to substances that can be used as alternatives to older active ingredients. This is really just to see if we can replace older system or older ingredients that we use in various systems. I believe that one of them is like red dye, whatever the number is. I don't have it off the top of my head, but that's one that they're trying to see, like, for example, if we can use better, safer alternatives to that to actually make America healthy again. In addition to this, it also requires that all chemicals used for the removal of moisture prior to crop harvesting, that it's reviewed to ensure that it actually meets all health standards as well as is labeled properly if it doesn't meet health standards. It also seeks to expedite research and evaluation of the impacts of chemicals in the food supply, so that way we can see how chemicals actually impact the human body so we can determine whether or not we should be using them in the first place. On top of that, it creates incentives to identify new methods to evaluate, diagnose, and treat the impacts of this said chemical exposure. Prioritizes research on new, innovative, and cost-effective technologies to reduce reliance on chemicals used in the farming process. And finally, expands regenerative farming initiatives. So overall, this is a huge executive order for Make America Healthy Again, because all this stuff is stuff that they've been asking for, and it seems like this will actually help reduce the effectiveness of the Monsanto ruling, and hopefully we'll start seeing some changes that actually require these companies to be held to a higher standard, so we're sure that the food that we're eating is actually safe and not harming us. So that was big news out of the White House. This week, like I said in the intro, we had a ton of SCOTUS rulings. I believe I have 7 here that we're going to go through today, maybe 8. But let's get through it, and I'm just going to start with the worst one to the best one. And before I even get into this, I just want to preface this and say that my determination of whether or not something is constitutional, I use the test of, is it in the text? And then look at history and tradition surrounding that text. Now, the first case that we're going to go over is Trump v. Barbara. So remember earlier last week, I told you that the 2 big cases we had to look out for were Trump v. Barbara and Watson v. RNC. Now, Trump v. Barbara is the worst case that was decided in this entire docket. It basically says that we don't have a country anymore, which is very sad to hear on the 250th anniversary of America. But the decision basically said that birthright citizenship extends to the children of people either unlawfully or temporarily in the U.S. Now, this was a 5-4 decision, and the reason it's 5-4, some places will report it as 6-3. This is because Kavanaugh said that it was unconstitutional, but not because of the 14th Amendment. 5 justices said it was because of the 14th Amendment. So that's how the decision was laid out. And this is just an absolutely ridiculous ruling because, like I said, you have to look at text, history, and tradition to actually determine what was actually meant by the 14th Amendment. Now, obviously, it says that the right of all people born in the U.S. are granted citizenship. Now, at the time, you have to, because so that's the text of it, but we can gain insight by actually looking at the history and tradition around this. If you look at when it was first introduced, this is from the person introducing it, Mr. Howard. He says, quote unquote, "This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers accredited to the government of the United States, but will include every other class of persons. It settles the great question of citizenship and removes all doubt as to what persons are or are not citizens of the United States. So that was directly, these are congressional transcripts from when the 14th Amendment was invoked, that it does not include foreigners, or as well as aliens, as well as people who belong to the families of ambassadors. Now, that's pretty clear right there. In addition to this, we also have a history of this being the case, with various laws going into effect. I mean, this largely impacted the Chinese initially when they started coming into the U.S. But despite that, the majority said that that wasn't the case, and that literally any person born here ever is a U.S. citizen. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But let's actually get into their arguments. Now, first it says, arguments for limiting birthright citizenship to those domiciled in the United States fail. These arguments err in their definition of allegiance, contending that natural allegiance was no longer sufficient for citizenship, and that some greater quantum of allegiance, based on domicile, was required. There is scant evidence for this dramatically revisionist view. Sources from 1776 to 1868 defined allegiance by birth just as the British did, as the tie or duty owed by one who was born within the dominions and under the protection of a particular sovereign. Now, again, you have to look at the history here, so that this is what they're saying is part of their reasoning why birthright citizenship extends to every single person born in the U.S. And the history here is that in Britain, they had a king. And anybody born in the UK or a colony of the, at this time, Britain, they were a subject of the king. Not they didn't necessarily have too many rights, but they were a subject of the king, and therefore they had duties to that king. Now, America doesn't have a king, and therefore these people don't necessarily have any duties to the President of the United States inherently. Naturally, we live in a society with a functioning federalist government, so you do have some level. So that's why I can see how this argument pans out. But getting past that, that's not actually how this is being interpreted now, because if you have somebody who is illegally in the country of the United States, well, they don't have any allegiance to America. In fact, they've never even become an official citizen of the United States. So they don't have allegiance here. And on top of that, you can also have people who come here from other countries through birth tourism. For example, this is big with the Chinese coming here, and they'll have people come here, give birth to somebody in the United States, so they're a U.S. citizen, and then send them back to China where they're raised within the CCP. I mean, that's literally what's happening here. So they don't owe any allegiance to the United States. So that's where, to me, this argument falls on its face. But getting past that, they even go on to say, in any case, post-enactment history cannot override the text. If Congress intended to limit American citizenship to the children of those domiciled in the United States, nothing in the succinct language of the Citizenship Clause conveyed that design. Words appearing frequently in the executive order, mother, father, lawful, temporary, are absent from the clause. Now, I just showed you that this isn't exactly true. It doesn't the post-enactment history actually follows the original intention of the law, where, as you saw in that congressional transcript, it wasn't meant to be applied to foreigners, aliens, children of ambassadors. This is literally what the person who created the amendment said about it. So, absolutely awful decision. I know right now Congress is seeking to do what they can to get around this. I know some people are saying that they're going to go based off of Kavanaugh's argument and pass a congressional law that will reverse this. Others are saying that they can't do that, and therefore they're trying to pass an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to clarify that this is the case. We'll see. I don't necessarily think that we'll be able to get an amendment ratified, just because of the nature of the country and how difficult it is to actually pass an amendment, especially with the way that Democrats are nowadays. But absolutely horrific decision. This has the greatest political impacts of these decisions that I'm going to read through today. Next was Watson v. RNC. This was another one that I said was going to be a huge decision, and everybody was expecting this to be ruled in favor of conservatives, meaning that ballots cast after Election Day are invalid. You cannot count them. Now, this is absolutely crazy because they didn't rule that. They said that federal statutes dictating Election Day don't supersede state laws allowing counting of ballots after Election Day. And this is extremely interesting for several reasons. I mean, I'm just going to go through a few quotes from the decision first before I go through my evidence against them. But first, says the federal election day statutes do not prevent Mississippi from counting absentee ballots postmarked by election day, but received up to 5 days thereafter. Nothing in the federal election day statutes requires ballots to be received by election day. Okay, that's fine. I mean, if you want to say that, that's okay. But at the same time, if you establish a federal election day, that means that any election will be held then, and therefore your ballot must be in by then. You can't count a ballot that isn't in. So therefore the election must be on that day, and it's logical that it would be concluded on that day. But that's not what they're saying here. Going further, they say, and this was the only good part about this decision, was that it was a very narrow decision. They said, the question before the court is narrow. Whether counting ballots postmarked by election day but received up to 5 days later violates the federal election day statutes. Plaintiffs do not challenge the general practice of absentee voting, the use of the postal service or common carrier to transmit ballots, early voting, or the counting and certification of votes after election day. So all these questions are still up for contention. They could be brought up to the Supreme Court, which is great. We really should bring some of that stuff up, but those questions weren't answered. It was strictly that states can count ballots postmarked by election day if it's within their laws that they can do it. Next, it goes on. The Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, UOCAVA, confirms that while federal law dictates when ballots must be cast, state law governs when they must be received. Now, to me, this is an extremely strenuous leap of logic, because the UOCAVA is strictly for absentee ballots. It's not necessarily for universal mail-in ballots. And as far as I'm aware, this is for, as it states in the name, uniformed and overseas citizens who are voting by absentee ballot. Therefore, they're members of the federal armed forces. I mean, that's I don't know how you can construe that any other way, which would be a federal issue, not a state issue. So therefore, it should realistically be governed by federal law. And the only instances when it would be governed by state law is for state elections. And this is referring to federal elections. So that doesn't make any sense. That's the argument that Amy Coney Barrett made here. Continuing, the Constitution thus envisions a system in which receipt of votes is necessarily divorced from voting, and it sets the crucially uniform day as the day of voting while leaving receipt to happen later. The federal election day statutes follow the same pattern. Now, this is actually not true, because you can't divorce receipt of voting from actually voting. In fact, the reason that you can't divorce it is because historically voting has been done in person. So therefore, receipt and voting occurred at the same time. You didn't have to worry about this. But then in 2020, we started having all this universal mail-in ballots, and that's where a lot of these problems come from. But even getting past the history of this, you also can look at the actual codes. So right here, I have two codes pulled up, because the Amy Coney Barrett seems to simultaneously pull from both of these statutes, which makes no logical sense to me. But first one is 2 U.S. Code 7, and this is for the election of congressional members. This states, the Tuesday next after the first Monday in November in every even-numbered year is established as the day for the election in each of the states and territories of the United States of representatives and delegates to the Congress commencing on the third day of January next thereafter. Clearly establishes an election day. And this is where their argument, or Amy Coney Barrett's argument, is that it doesn't specify that ballots cannot be counted if they are received after election day. Now, I would, like I said, I would argue against that, because it establishes an election day, not a period of time, an indefinite period of time after election day that ballots can be received. But this is where she's saying that it's not labeled. Then they pull from 3 U.S. Code 21, which is for the federal election, or elections for the presidency, which is election day means the Tuesday next after the first Monday in November in every fourth year succeeding every election of a president and vice president held in each state, except in the case of a state that appoints electors by popular vote. If the state modifies the period of voting as necessitated by force majeure events that are extraordinary and catastrophic as provided under laws of the state enacted prior to such day, election day shall include the modified period of dating. of voting. Now, this is where, to me, their argument, like I said, it's a bad decision. Their argument falls even further on its face because, like I said, here, it even does say that if the state modifies the period of voting, that's possible, but only as necessitated by force majeure events that are extraordinary and catastrophic. You could argue that happened in 2020. Okay, that's fine. What's the catastrophic or extraordinary reasons that they need to count ballots after election day today, like this election year, or in 2024? I mean, there's no actual reason for it, and that's why they're arguing this, but they're ignoring the parts of the Constitution that they don't want to follow, which is just crazy to me. I just want to get through some of the other things. They also go on. Finally, plaintiffs' policy arguments about election integrity and voter confidence are properly directed to legislatures, not courts. So they say that you need to say that the states need to pass these laws. Well, the problem is that the states are passing laws that are realistically unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court is saying, oh, no, you need to go through them. Well, what's the purpose of the Supreme Court if we can't get relief from these unconstitutional laws? So that's crazy. But then it also goes further, and this is the final snippet of this decision that I'm going to read. Plaintiffs argue that Mississippi's election system violates the Election Day statutes because the Postal Service and common carriers allow mail to be recalled before it is delivered to election officials, meaning that the electorate's choice is not actually made as of Election Day. Even if plaintiffs are right about Mississippi law, they would still lose the challenge they have pressed in this litigation, that post-Election Day ballot receipt is itself unlawful. Post-Election Day receipt, considered on its own, does not conflict with the Election Day statutes, and state law is preempted so far as the conflict extends. Now, again, I've already outlined this does violate the Election Day statute because it's an election day. It's not an election period. And the argument that's being made here is that these people could realistically, if a state wanted to, they could say that they're going to hold off announcing the results of an election indefinitely because they haven't received all votes. So let's say California, obviously, that's probably the biggest example of this. They issue universal mail-in ballots. Let's say they issue 250,000. They can then say that if they don't receive all 250,000, then they won't call the election until they do. Now, that provides a literally unlimited window for the election to occur, and therefore they could realistically then say, oh, well, this person's far enough ahead, we're just going to stop counting the ballots, and they're the person. Or if it's in a district which they don't align with politically, they would then say, oh, well, we're just never going to call this election. That seat's going to be open until we finally hold another election where the result goes our way. And that's clearly not what the Constitution meant, but that's what the Supreme Court decided. This one was also 5-4 with Amy Coney Barrett siding with the liberals. It's absolutely horrendous that they decided this. And to me, and it's funny because I've said this before, I watch Tim Pool quite often, and I was thinking this before he even said it, but it really does seem like the Supreme Court is taking more of an accelerationist stance in that most of these decisions that they've been making, at least in the past few terms, is explicitly dividing Americans. Whether you like it or not, that's what it seems is happening. And it really, it's horrible for the country if that's the stance that they're taking, where a civil war is going to happen either way. They would just rather have it happen now. Because, I mean, first we had a few, what was it, a month or so ago now, where they decided the redistricting case, where they said that any racially gerrymandered district was unconstitutional, therefore eliminating representation for Democrats in a lot of areas, which, like I said, it's politically beneficial to me, but gerrymandering in itself is bad, regardless of which party does it. So they did that, which was obviously very divisive. They obviously had the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which was good, in my opinion, but very divisive. Even though the fact of the matter is that the people who supported Roe v. Wade actually have more abortions now than they did before. But getting past that, we also had these decisions here with birthright citizenship, as well as the Election Day statutes, which are incredibly divisive and will only lead to further contentious elections that will lead to further radicalization and partisanship in this country. And it's just going to be bad. There's another case that's coming up that I'll get to in the next segment, but that to me was kind of the indication that this is what they're aiming for, whether you like it or not. And like I said, I'm not saying that this is definitely what they're saying. It's just this is based on the information that they're showcasing and the decisions that they're making. That's what it seems like they're trying to do. So the next bad decision, which to me is it's just an illogical decision, was Trump v. Cook, where this was an argument where Trump sued or Trump fired Lisa Cook. She was the head of the or one of the governors on the Federal Reserve for cause, and she sued him, and he said that you can't still be on the board while you're suing me. You're off the board until the point at which your lawsuit goes through, and if you win the lawsuit, then you can be put back. Now, the Supreme Court decided that Trump violated the Federal Reserve's for cause removal, and this was, and it essentially said that Trump cannot remove her while litigation is pending. So therefore, until the litigation is resolved, Trump cannot remove Lisa Cook. Now, this is, some people will say this is a horrific decision. Like I said, it's just an illogical decision because he has to wait for this trial to go through and for the courts to decide whether or not he can actually fire Lisa Cook or whether or not his reasoning was valid. Now, this is interesting because another decision that came out literally the same day was Trump v. Slaughter, which ruled that the FTC's for cause removal provision is contrary to the concept of separation of powers and is therefore unconstitutional. So Trump can remove anybody he wants from executive agencies, except for in the case of the Federal Reserve, in which case it somehow is constitutional pending litigation. So again, makes absolutely no sense why they would decide these two in such contradictory ways, especially because I believe both of these, one of them I believe was 6-3, the other one was 5-4. I don't recall exactly the vote counts, but it's crazy that we had same day two decisions that were completely contradictory in nature. And this is another reason kind of that I say that it's kind of showing the division in this country and especially on the Supreme Court. Finally, we're getting to some of the good cases, though. We had Chatry v. United States. This was over whether or not the state could use cell phone tracking data without a warrant, I believe without a warrant, and in order to investigate criminals. And it was ruled by the Supreme Court that no, you cannot get cell phone location data from tech companies without using a warrant because it's a violation of your Fourth Amendment right, since you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your cell phone location information. Great ruling, obviously, because the government can't track your cell phone anymore, which is crazy that they could do that in the first place, but that was great ruling. Next, this one's kind of a mixed ruling to me. It's good politically for Republicans, but in my personal opinion, I want less money in politics. So this is obviously the National Republican Senatorial Committee, the FEC, where it was decided that restrictions placed on a political party's ability to spend on campaign activities in coordination with candidates by the Federal Election Campaign Act is a violation of the First Amendment. So there are unlimited, political parties can spend an unlimited amount of capital investing in direct coordination with their candidates to help them get elected. Like I said, great for the Republican Party because they actually have a ton of money right now, whereas the Democrat Party is broke. They're actually in debt. But my problem with it is I think that we have too much money in politics right now. It makes it extremely difficult for the average American to actually get involved with politics and win political office. But unfortunately, this is how they ruled. Whether you like it or not, that's the case. So there's that. And then the final big case that was ruled upon this week was West Virginia v. BPJ. Absolutely stupid case. I cannot believe that the Supreme Court had to hear this. They were arguing that keeping men out of women's sports was a violation of Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This is what BPJ was arguing. And Supreme Court, once again, ruled with reality that states can decide to keep men out of women's sports because that is what Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment protects. And this one, I believe it was unanimous for one portion of it, whether or not, so the Title IX was unanimous, and then the Equal Protection Clause was 6-3. Obviously, the 3 Democrats were, or the 3 liberal justices were on the opposing side for that. But I mean, it's just crazy to me that this is something that the Supreme Court had to hear. And it's even crazier to me that they wouldn't flat out say that, no, men cannot compete in women's sports. And again, this is another argument for the accelerationism, because now what you're going to have is you're going to have Republican states banning men in women's sports, Democrat states allowing it. So when you have interstate competitions, Democrat states are going to have men on their teams, and Republican states are only going to have women, and it's going to lead to a conflict. It's extremely divisive, so not very good, but it's good that they actually sided with reality here. Next, we had an announcement of 2 huge cases that are going to be heard by the Supreme Court, which is the challenge to AR-15 bans. And this is actually a challenge to all assault weapon bans. They picked up the one in Cook County as well as Connecticut's law. And this could be huge because this could actually restore constitutional rights to millions of Americans across the country, because obviously this is a violation of the Constitution. There's no logical reason why the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed could possibly be construed to allow for the infringement on this right by banning weapons in common use. So that's great that they're hearing this. It's been a long time that they've been putting off these cases. They're finally going to hear it. So hopefully it goes through and they decide it the correct way. But we'll see. That's coming out next term. It could be good for Americans across the country. Now, I want to take a little break from the politics of the day and get into my American Standard segment, where we talk about culture, because obviously we want to change the culture here and actually improve American society. And this week, we're going to be talking about what happened at the Empire State Building. This was huge news this week. There were 2 climbers who climbed to the top of the Empire State Building. It seems like they were doing it in protest of something, but it wasn't very political. So when they reached the top of the Empire State Building, they actually flew a flag that said, "When the power of love beats the love of power, the world knows peace." Now, not very political, more just kind of like that live, laugh, love saying. I mean, it doesn't really mean too much. It sounds good, but not really too much behind it. But they did this, and then on their way down, one of them actually proposed to the other. So it seems like they're engaged. This is great. I know it's illegal and very dangerous. It puts a ton of people in danger, whether it be the first responders actually responding to it, the people themselves, or the people on the ground who could have been fallen on if one of these 2 individuals were to fall off the Empire State Building. So don't go out and do this. If you're listening, don't do this. But it really reminds me, because I grew up hearing the story of the man who tightrope walked across the Twin Towers when they were still around. And it's a very cool thing to do. And to me, the coolest thing about this was the proposal. Not many people are going to be able to top that. So very, very nice for them. Congratulations to them for getting engaged. Unfortunately, they had to spend the night in a jail cell because of this. But it's good that they did this, or good that they got engaged. And I would much rather focus on stories like this, where they're just doing cool things that may be illegal, as opposed to all the radical policies that we're hearing out of Democrats across the country, which we're going to get to this one now. This is from Zohran Mamdani, who got a ton of backlash, because last week, I believe I talked about it, where Europeans are saying that Americans are crazy for having air conditioning, and they're having many deaths in Europe right now because of the extreme heat waves going across the country. They don't have ACs over there due to environmental regulations. Only about 20% of households in Europe actually have air conditioning units. And so they were blaming Americans for our luxury. And so Zohran Mamdani put out this post this week. New York, it's hot out there, and the power grid is working overtime to keep us cool. Set your AC to 78 degrees, turn off lights and electronics you're not using, and unplug what you can. Our city is doing its part too, maintaining the 78-degree rule in our buildings, dimming/turning off our lights during peak electricity demand, asking private partners to do the same, and powering down non-essential equipment. A stable grid means the AC stays on and lives are saved. Let's ease demand and get through the heat together. Now, as I said in my intro, This is the warmth of collectivism. It's 78 degrees in summer and very likely going to be about 40 to 45 degrees in winter. Because that's what collectivism is all about. It's about the warmth, or in this case, the cold in winter. All joking aside, though, it's just crazy to me that they're asking us in a first world nation to turn off our AC, which we have the technology for. It's readily available. We use it to keep ourselves comfortable. And because you are placing restrictions on power usage due to environmental acts, decreasing the quality of living for Americans, you're saying that we need to abide by that. That's not really how this works. We're a first world nation, like I said, not a third world nation. If you were in a third world nation, this might work. We're not in that. We're in a first world nation. If you were in New York, set the temperature to whatever you want. Realistically, that's your right to do. The government doesn't have the right to tell you what temperature you can live in. Otherwise, we'd be in tyranny. And so don't abide by it. But obviously, keep yourself cool. It's crazy hot out there. Like I said, I'm going to DC. I believe it's supposed to be something like 100 degrees tomorrow while I'm down there for the 4th. I'll be trying to stay cool. I'm going to be going in and out of some of the cooling huts just to make sure that I'm safe. But yeah, drink some water, make sure you're cool, and don't listen to Zohran Mamdani's 78-degree rule. It's absolutely insane. Now, getting past that, we had another instance of, it's not technically violence yet, but it would eventually become violence, where there was a transgender Democrat campaigner who put out several videos this past week about how you need to kill your local Republican, and he wants a transgender jihad. Absolutely insane. And these are the people. This is the base of the left. Like I've said before, they are the ones calling for political violence. They overwhelmingly support it. I believe it's something like 25 to 28% of them support political violence or political violence is justified in at least some means. They celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk. They call for the assassination of many prominent Republicans. Hassan Piker, let the streets run red with capitalist blood. All these things are the Democrat Party. And they consistently say, oh, no, it's the right that's violent. Well, look at this. Like I said, this is basically, for all intents and purposes, a regular liberal, somebody who is just part of the liberal base, who was an activist and trying to get Democrats elected, is going out and saying, kill your local Republican, and that they want to make this the moderate position for the state of Wisconsin. That's a quote. This cannot stand in America. That's not what this country is founded on. That's like, these people need to be completely segregated from polite society. Like, you cannot, like I've said this before, you cannot have a society function when you have one side that is willing to kill people just for their political beliefs, and everybody needs to interact with them. For example, doctors, restaurant workers, waitresses, you cannot trust them. If you think that they're going to kill you, you cannot trust them, and therefore you cannot function as a society in that case. So these people need to be, this individual in particular needs to be arrested for incitement of violence. But anybody calling for political violence needs to be arrested under incitement of violence. Anybody who commits political violence needs to be arrested for committing that political violence. And anybody who calls for it and is not legally able to be held accountable for incitement of violence needs to lose their job. They need to be pushed out to the outside of society. They cannot be allowed in public life at all, because otherwise you're going to see more political violence, and it's just going to get worse. And I don't want that in America. I think that most people don't, but that only happens if you kick these people out of society. And fortunately, though, there are still some people who love America, and I'm going to be going to see hopefully many of them tomorrow out in D.C. for the 4th of July. Obviously, we're going to have the largest fireworks show in history. It's going to be great to see. I'm going to be at the state fair, so I can go around and see all the various state setups that they're doing out there. Go on the Ferris wheel out there. Hopefully see a few good shows, because I know there's a few speakers that are going to be there, especially the Artemis 2 crew is going to be there. So I'll provide that link in the description. I highly recommend that you, at the bare minimum, watch it live if you can. It's going to be absolutely great Great event for celebrating the 250th anniversary of the country. So go check that out. And now, as you know, I always close out my show with a moment of kindness, something that kind of, I see a story of the week that kind of speaks to me, and it's kind of heartwarming, not political whatsoever. And it just goes to show that people are still good, and good still exists in the world. Because I want you to realize that and not focus on all the doom and gloom of politics nowadays. So this week, we're going to Arizona, where there was a school resource officer who decided that he was going to rent out an entire movie theater after a field trip was almost canceled. Now, this, like I said, this happened in Arizona. So this was school resource officer Sean Reevy paid to rent out all 144 seats at Harkins Scottsdale, so 7th and 8th graders enrolled in the school's After the Bell summer program could see Toy Story 5. Popcorn, candy, and drinks were included. For several of the students, it was their first time inside a movie theater. The trip nearly didn't happen. Funding for the end of summer field trip fell through, leaving program coordinator Katie Jenkins without options. She turned to Reevy. She told me how much she needed, and I gave it to them so they could go, Reevy said. Reevy said the theater rental cost was under $2,000. If they needed more, I would have given them more, he said. You can't break a promise to a child. They came here knowing that there's a reward at the end. Greenway is a Title I school in Phoenix, meaning most of its family qualify as low income. Assistant Principal Stacy Alejo said many students receive free breakfast and lunch daily. These opportunities are super important for us, Alejo said. So this is just great to see somebody. He invested his own money to make sure that these kids had a chance to do something that they very likely either wouldn't be able to do or couldn't do ever. It's very, very nice to see that, because obviously more people need to start doing this stuff, giving back to their communities. Absolutely great. And I hope that you actually take this into your lives, your daily lives, realistically. But that's all that I have for this show. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great weekend celebrating the 4th of July, 250 years of American exceptionalism, and have a great week. Thank you very much, and I'll catch you next week on the Ben Corriveau Show.